It's time for the Rose Chat Podcast, a podcast dedicated to celebrating the world's most beloved flower, the rose. Join award-winning gardeners Chris VanCleave and Teresa Byington as they chat with rose lovers and experts from around the globe. With each episode, you'll gain valuable knowledge and insights to achieve the rose garden you've always dreamed of. Listen now as we explore the world of roses.
Hey friends, I'm back from a little break where I traveled to England to spend some time with some very special people. Now, while I was there, I have to tell you, it was cold, unseasonably cold. I had to buy an extra sweater. Even the roses were affected and were blooming later than usual, which was great for me as I got to see so many still in their first flush. What a gift. England and roses truly are a match made in heaven, so I was thrilled. But I returned to weather that was certainly not colder than usual. It is hot, hot, hot here, and I suspect you're dealing with the same. So this is a perfect time to chat about Waterwise Roses. And my guest today is going to do just that. Mark Mason Taylor, the recent winner of the American Rose Society's Rising Star Award. Mark is a certified licensed landscaper, and in 2021, Mark founded a workers' co-op committed to water conservation. His business specializes in low water rose gardens, and as of 2024, the co-op has planted over 2,000 roses and saved over, are you ready, 300 million gallons of water. And that gets our attention. Hey, Mark, welcome to Rose Chat.
Hey, Teresa. Glad to be here.
So glad you're here. Now, did I get that right? It is 300 million gallons of water you've saved?
It is 300 million gallons.
Oh, my goodness. Now, I met you through the great program you did for the American Rose Society on the same subject. For those who are just now meeting you, tell us a little bit about yourself and the work you do.
Yeah, so I guess I'll start with my day job. My day job, I am a data scientist for Northrop Grumman, so I do artificial intelligence in space. But my real passion is roses. I don't shut up about roses. I absolutely love roses. And so that's why a couple years ago I founded Perfume Punk, which is the workers' co-op. And that really is designed to get people to plant more roses and save more water. So that's a little bit about me. I'm located in Salt Lake City, Utah. So as I call it, the crossroads of the West. But
I love your company philosophy, working with nature to make Utah bloom.
Mm-hmm.
Well done. So what's your rose story? You don't want to stop talking about roses, but what piqued your interest in the beginning?
Yeah, so my parents are not gardeners, which many people have like a grandmother or something like that who kind of like hooks them on roses and gets them excited. I am not. I come from like a vacuum where the only person who was really interested in gardening was my next door neighbor who worked with the Utah Master Gardener program. Fun fact about him, he did not like roses, but I learned all the gardening tips from him. He would come and bring me plants. He'd like slip me plants to plant in the yard, and then we had these bushes that I really hated, so I dumped Roundup into it, and apparently our neighbor was doing the same thing, was dumping Roundup into it. So my dad thought that he was like, I don't understand how these roses are dying. Are there spiders inside? Something like that. It's just he was trying to play defense against two people. But yeah, they deserved to die, though. They were ugly. And anyways, what happened was my parents, when I was college, they moved to a new house with about an acre lot. And how I kind of paid rent living in their basement was I landscaped their yard. And so I was trying to figure out, what plants worked well in Utah. I'd heard my entire life that it's like a desert and it has horrible soil and things like that. And the one thing I found that did incredibly well was roses. There were few to any diseases without fertilizer. Hybrid teas were getting 5 to 6 inch blooms. They were massive. And so it was so inconsistent with what I had learned all my life. And then I got more and more interested in roses. I remember walking in the Brooklyn Botanical Garden and I smelled a rose and I had to like bend down and find out what it was. And that rose was Francis Mayland. And so this was back in like, the aughts. So I got Francis Mayland shipped across the country and that was like, it's still one of my favorite roses and it almost smells like lemons and a little perfumey. But then I joined the Utah Rose Society and got involved with the ARS. And then I found I was really good at propagation. Yeah. And then the co-op kind of bloomed from there. And so it's definitely been a gradual process, but the fact that roses grow so well in Utah, that was kind of the big surprise. Because like a hydrangea, it's gonna burn right up. Those poor ladies are gonna get planted and just char to death. But roses absolutely love it here.
Wow, that is so cool. I want to speak to just a little bit about your master gardener friend. He was not alone. I realized several years ago that a lot of garden clubs and master gardeners, many of the members had grown roses in the 80s, and they were roses that needed a lot of spray and were more of divas. And so they just kind of gave up on roses. And I remember doing a program for a couple of years that was called Just Like Hairstyles, Roses Have Changed Since the 80s. And just because I wanted to reintroduce people to roses, because there are differences in roses. So so your master gardener friend might have had an experience or heard about experiences where it didn't work. So because many had tried them and failed, and people were, very much in that era getting on the sustainability bandwagon. And I know that's very important to you too. And so those, we had to re-educate there for a little while.
Oh, for sure. And that's like right around the time that the Knockout came out. I think Bill Radler hybridized that in 1989 or something like that. And that was such a seminal moment in rose growing culture because it really introduced modern resistancy. And I think it opened it made so many more people rosarians. But yeah, for the longest time in Utah, they were just not encouraging people to grow roses.
Yes, absolutely. And that was, it's pretty much across the board, for sure. But, I think that that Will's Knockout Rose, it did so many things for the rose culture. It was a beautiful rose, sustainability, but also it proved what the public wanted and what the public was willing to pay for, because it sold like crazy.
Oh, yeah. And it looks so good in mass plantings. Like, I think, just the idea of moving. I remember landscape roses were really popular a little while ago. And the fact that like there was this another application where you could just do it in massive, massive plantings was really cool.
And I especially like, of course, I'm a pink rose girl, but I especially like that first double pink. I think of the double red was the first, and then very quickly we had double pink, and that one that's beautiful in mass for sure.
Oh yeah, like one of the coolest things is, I know initially they didn't really have great fragrance, and rose fragrance is, I have like a super nose. I'm like a bloodhound. My sister, when she was pregnant, she was like, "Is this what you smell all the time?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I can smell when a dish towel is about to turn like 3 miles away." And so I just like, I have that. And so rose fragrance is so big to me. I have every single James Gamble award-winning fragrance rose in my garden that I used to hybridize off of because I love it. I absolutely love it. And initially the knockouts didn't have that, but now another one of my favorite roses, Sitting Pretty, which has an incredible story in Utah. That one's just insane. It's such a good rose, great disease resistance, has a beautiful fragrance. It's pink, and here's the crazy thing is after it's established, so in its 3rd year in Utah, it only needs 1 irrigation a year.
Oh my goodness. Okay, that's it. We've got to jump into the subject of roses and water. Now, you're probably like me, and you've always heard that roses love water but hate wet feet. That's something you hear all the time, but that makes them sound anything but water-wise. So, what do you say?
So the science doesn't necessarily bear that out. So there's this whole organization called Quell, and what it is it's all about the science of how you should irrigate different plants. So if you've ever heard of a smart sprinkler system that pulls in the weather data from nearby, that is kind of the product of Quell. Well, one of the things they do in Quell is they measure how much certain plants need water or how much water they need to consume. And so basically they plant it in a bathtub, and then, where the drain is, they have a hole that measures how much water the plant is actually taking in. And even the thirstiest roses use 50% of what you would use for a lawn. So 50%. So that's a really thirsty one, and that's going to be like your seaside roses, like your rugosas. Moving down from that, you have roses that don't need to be watered at all. There's a native rose in Utah called Rosa woodsy, and it's fine without a watering. So already we know that they're kind of water-wise, and then moving in, you just kind of you're able to see which client, which variety, which things like that. Like I said, Sitting Pretty is just a sipper. And here's the crazy thing is that research, they test them side by side. So like one rose will get 3 irrigations, and the next rose will get 2 irrigations, and the next rose will get 1. And what they found out was the extra irrigations gave it no added benefit.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. So it's kind of insane. I will say, old garden roses do tend to need a little more water, but what they kind of like is just an underleaf misting later in the day. So it's just to kind of cool down at night. But they really don't need that much water. And here's the crazy thing. Water is not only is wonderful and nourishing, but it is also a spreader of disease. And so if you overwater, for example, if we see black spot in Utah, we know someone is overwatering because we don't have black spot here.
Oh my goodness. People are fainting right now hearing you say that because you are such the 1%, these desert people. You're just, everyone else is going, oh.
Well, and that's kind of the crazy thing is like, it isn't a desert, but what Salt Lake City is it's on the convergence of 3 different ecosystems. So you have this incredible soil from the southeast, and that's where like Moab and the Red Rocks are. And so they actually ship our soil back to New England, and it's called azomite, and till it into the soil to get kind of a sandy loam, which tends to be our most frequent soil type.
I've seen that for sale on Amazon.
Yeah,
I know
azomite. It's like 45 minutes away from me. And I used to live in Pittsburgh, and I just about fainted because they call it Utah Earth back there. I was like, what?
Oh my gosh. So are there roses that that you said the old garden roses were a little bit more thirsty, but are there any roses that you would steer away from that are other than the old garden roses that would require more water, or are all of them about the same?
Well, I would never recommend not growing a rose. I would say it's right rose, right place, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you can think of the United States and the Mississippi River being the dividing line, you kind of have two native roses that explain the growing conditions. East of the Mississippi and west of the Mississippi. And west of the Mississippi, one of the most common roses is Rosa woodsy, as I said. It's a little more stocky, and it has a really nice big long taproot. East of the Mississippi is Rosa pilastris, and Rosa pilastris has kind of these weird, more dense lateral roots, and that is for kind of poor soils and very wet soils. And the two different root systems have two different functions. The deep taproot in the Rosa woodsy is meant to pump water down into the soil and keep it for the dry season, while the root systems of Rosa pilastris is to push the water away from the plant to keep the roots dry. And so this is an adaptation that you not only see in roses, but you see in all plants. In drier locations, you tend to have plants with deep taproots. And in really wet locations, you tend to have roots that are designed to push water away. And the roots can also come up for better aeration. So understanding those two climates and understanding how roses grow across the United States gives you a good idea of what will grow well in your area. One thing that we have in Utah is, I call it like Utah sun versus like any other sun, because in Utah, like our part shade is still sunny.
Oh, yeah.
Just because we have a lot of sunshine. We don't have a lot of overcast days. Whereas in Pittsburgh, it's all overcast.
Yep. Well, that just makes it even more important that the roses that we buy are tested regionally. I love it. We've got the arts program, American Rose Trials for Sustainability, and they're done regionally, and there's others too. And I love that because you have the chance of getting the rose that is bred for your conditions. So I love that we have these trials to help us with our decision making, because there's no way for us to know those kinds of things when we just fall in love with a picture. So
yeah, and the biggest thing is like your local rose society, like they'll know exactly what works best there.
Absolutely. In your public rose gardens near you, that kind of thing. So good to join a local society, and a lot of that information, if you don't have a local society, you can get from the American Rose Society as well. So good. Now, you don't have black spot, but in these hot, dry conditions, are there pests and diseases that you have to be ready for?
Just kind of the standards ones. We tend to have, I always pronounce this wrong, like arachnos. So like if you do see something that looks like black spot, it tends to just be the slow growing black fungus. We have aphids. We have crickets is one that I'm always surprised by. But the aphids are probably the biggest problem, and thrips, and then of course you do get spider mites occasionally. But most of those can be knocked out just with simple neem oil. A neem oil mixture, or even they've found that soybean oil has a similar chemical as the neem oil in it. So
I've not heard that. Wonderful.
So you can just grab some vegetable oil from the store and save a bit. Or even better, what I do is I mix the two together, and then I change up the mixture every year. so it keeps them on their toes.
Yes, very, very good. Okay, so let's talk irrigation.
Oh, I
So,
forgot one more thing,
okay, go ahead.
and this is probably the most important.
Ooh.
I remember, yeah, I probably when I went through the Consulting Rosarian school, this kind of blew my mind, and I thought it was hot crap, but it is real. And it's you want to plant yarrow next to it, your roses, as a companion plant. And what yarrow does is it has a different fragrance. Humans tend to smell like we have the same sniffer as a bee. And
Mhm.
so we like, we like the rose smell, we like things like that. Well, ladybugs are attracted to kind of that like musky scent in yarrow. And the first year I started planting yarrow next to my roses, it blew my mind. I had almost no aphids.
Wow.
And so every time we plan a rose garden, the filler plant that we use in between bushes is typically a 6-inch to 12-inch yarrow that as a ground cover. And
And
that is a gem.
I grow a lot of yarrow, and most of it gets overly happy. So, but it's easy to pull out. But now that I think of it, I rarely see aphids here. So, I guess I've looked out on that one. But I love it just for arrangements and dried flowers and that kind of thing. And it's just there comes in so many wonderful colors. So that is a great tip, and something very easy to grow, and works well with your roses.
Yeah, my favorite is the Greek yarrow because it doesn't get higher than 6 inches, and it's kind of like how a diamond, when you put a diamond against a black back, it just
Hmm.
makes it more vibrant. When you get like a good, nice ground cover of Greek yarrow with its little white flowers, it just makes that rose pop. And
Hmm.
so, and then you can kind of plant. This is what I do. Hot tip. I then plant like tulips and daffodils, and then I'll go over the top with the Greek yarrow, and that kind of is around all of my roses, and then it kind of all pops up together and work. And it's great because they all go at a different time, and so they all use the nutrients at a different time. So
Hmm. Perfect. What a great idea. Well done. Well, are we ready to talk irrigation?
yeah, sorry about telling you that.
I'm so glad you did. That's just so good to know. Very helpful, Mark. So, do you have some do's and don'ts about irrigation? I know that we have decided we hand water. We have a lot of roses, probably got about 120 right now. And I'm thinking
When you
maybe,
hand water, wow.
yes, yes. So I'm thinking, well, maybe next year we're going to put some of the beds, some sort of irrigation. So what should I do?
Yeah, so the best thing for roses is drip irrigation. And what drip is it's basically a tube, and it often has emitters in it. And those
Mm-hmm.
emitters put water out really slow. So we're talking about maybe a gallon an hour. So very, very slow, but that's great for roses because you want to get the water down. Conventional sprinklers, and this is going to sound crazy, the majority of water that's put out by conventional sprinklers, unless you're living in sandy soil, does not get absorbed by the soil because they put water out way too fast. And so the big baddie, the big bad guy of irrigation is called runoff. And
Mm-hmm.
runoff is the water that does not go into the ground, but it ends up in your neighbor's street. It it ends up on the
Mm-hmm.
sidewalk. It ends up things like that. Often it carries fertilizer in it, so it's polluted. Toxic algae blooms across the country. If you've ever had one in your area in a body of water, they are typically from farm runoff. So runoff is like the really big bad guy. So you want the water that is put out by your irrigation system to be accepted by your soil. And for the majority of soil types, unless you live in just pure sand, you need a drip irrigation system to really have 90+% of that water accepted into the soil.
Mm-hmm.
The next kind of option down below, so say you have a lawn, surprise, you can actually do drip irrigation under the lawn. People don't know that, but you just bury the drip irrigation and then go over the top with dirt and sod. But let's say you want like an overhead sprinkler. There's something called an MP rotator head, and what that head, they're kind of expensive. They can be like $7 to $12 just for the nozzle. And that's like, oh my gosh, that's like such an expensive head. But what it does is it uses the same technology as a jet ski. And so you get larger water droplets that are shot out of it, which means you lose less to wind. And yeah, the droplet size is huge when you're looking at like an aerosol sprinkler. So by using an MP rotator, you're going to move from maybe 30 to 40% of the water getting into your ground to more 50 to 60% of the water. So, and these are really simple upgrades to do, just switching out the nozzle on a sprinkler, very easy to do. But they do save a lot of water in the long run. Drip irrigation kits, you can find them nearly anywhere. Converter kits, they might seem intimidating, but throw up a YouTube and they'll walk you through it, and you will just be surprised at how much better your roses do with those.
Excellent. Well, now help us do the math. So we put in a drip system. So how much water do we need to give these roses?
So my standard is, let's start with 2 gallons of water a week, right? And then you want to let the plant talk to you and see if it needs more water or less. Here's the thing that's kind of crazy that most people don't think of. So let's say you don't want to change your sprinkler system. You've got it all together. You're still going to want to change your sprinkler program about once a month, because at the hottest time of the year, like right now, like in August, for example, you're going to water twice as much as you as in spring. And so kind of, I call it humping your water. But you want to create kind of this almost camel's hump of how much water you give it. So you start by tapering on your water. So at the hottest time of the year, you're watering twice as much as the beginning of the year, and then you taper off in the fall. And this is what a lot of those smart sprinkler systems do. And that's where you get a lot of water savings just by doing that. So an example is I need 2 gallons of water in my roses, just normally per week. So in summer, I'm going to try to shoot for 3 gallons of water or 4 gallons of water in my roses during the 100-degree temperatures. And then I'm going to taper it down, because when the high is like 70, they don't need as much. But making sure you do that, kind of changing it once a month, like, you will be amazed at how much water you save. And the coolest thing is your roses will love it so much more, because they'll have the water when they need it.
Send those roots down where they're protected.
Yep, definitely.
Oh, so good. I think of, I'm thinking back to one year we truly did have a drought here. Maybe it was about 7 years ago. And, you can water for a while, and then, you just have to be conservative. And we were being conservative with water. Very much at that time we were on a well. And so the roses just, drought is just cruel. You look out and they just look so bad. But what we found that year was when the rain did come, it was just like the brown grass. They popped right back. Do you find that as well?
So that's called drought tolerance, when they can go without water for a certain amount. And several varieties are drought tolerant. One of the things that a lot of people kind of worry about is when they see leaves getting brown.
Mm-hmm.
But I equate that more to just a sunburn. Like, everybody gets a sunburn from time to time. It happens. But what will happen is the rose bush will adapt to that. It's getting a different signal, and then over 3 or 4 years, you're not going to have that same browning. So one rose that I absolutely love that has the worst foliage heat tolerance I've ever seen in my life is Polynesian Punch. I think it's a really beautiful rose. But just the foliage on it just chars, though. But as it's getting established, it will gradually have less and less, heat stroke in it. Kind of, for me, it's more like the establishing of it. That once a rose is established, it's going to be able to do better than that. And you kind of want to be a little mean to your rose.
Don't spoil them.
Yeah.
Don't spoil them. That's so true. While I was away for almost 3 weeks in England, I was so afraid, the roses are going to, it's going to be hot, blah, blah, blah. But we actually had quite a bit of rain while I was gone. But what I had done for those who were watering for us while we were gone is I had little red flags. And if it was a new rose, I put a flag by it, because a lot of the roses could have handled a good long time without water, but the new roses I felt like could not have. So where I had new roses, because I had added several this year, I put a red flag, and that was give this one a little more love. And so that's basically what you're saying. Once they get established and are healthy, they can handle a lot.
Yeah. One thing that's also important to see, you see this a lot on the internet, and people are like, don't water every day, water every other day. You only want to water 3 times a week or something like that. It really depends on your soil texture, right? So that's going to let you know how much you want to water.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have sand or sandy loam, you're going to want to water every day. If you have a loam, you're going to want to water every other day. If you have a clay, you're going to want to water like twice a week for twice or 3 times as long. And if you're off on that, that will cause the rose just won't have enough water. So understanding that texture and really letting your irrigation guide you on that is a big thing. The other thing, and this is fascinating, that there's a study that hasn't come out, but it's coming out from Utah State University. They tried to figure out if time of day was the most important thing to determine when to water. Because you hear different things. People say like, oh, don't water during the day, it's all going to evaporate. What they found out was it doesn't actually matter. The thing that matters most with irrigation is wind. So you don't want to water when you have the highest wind. And being aware of, and that's so revolutionary, isn't it? Because we never think like, oh, look at the wind cycle throughout the day. We only think of like the sun. But that wind cycle in your garden is really going to tell you when you want to water and turn on your sprinklers or irrigation system.
One other thing I just thought of, is there any benefit to adding an extra little splash? Like, is it helpful during those hot, dry times that, okay, we've got the roots taken care of because we've got the drip system, but what about a splash of water on those hot leaves? Is that a good thing or is that a bad thing?
It depends. So it's are you in a humid climate or are you in a dry climate? Now, if you're in a go ahead.
I'm humid, you're dry, so let's cover them both.
Right. So in a humid climate, you can make things worse by splashing it on the leaves, which creates higher humidity, which can lead to more mildew friends, right? So that can be worse. And then the other thing is soil temperature is more important, far more important than air temperature to a rose. And it's hard because that's kind of the opposite to humans. We don't really care about soil temperature, but air temperature is everything.
Yeah.
So you need to look at your tap water or whatever the temperature of your water. And if your water is cool, say it's at like a 50 degrees and you're like 90 degrees outside, you can cool your soil just by running a minute after the hottest part of the day. And that will just cool your soil by getting that really cool water. Now, there are a lot of places in the country where the water is just as hot as the air. So you really want to be careful with that. Now, talking about the dry, we have a couple really cool things we can do. We are the home of something called a swamp cooler or an evaporative cooler. And what a swamp cooler does is it's like a ghetto air conditioner. And you can put it in your house. What it does is it humidifies the air. And if you open a door, it'll actually lower the temperature in your house 5 to 10 degrees. Well, a swamp cooler just basically works very similar to a splashy fountain. So if you have a really hot area of your yard and you're in a dry place, if you install a splashy fountain, you can actually lower the temperature of that area by 5 to 10 degrees during the hottest time. And I did that in my yard. I have an area that has full sun, and it's a solar fountain. I fill it up with the hose, and it goes on at a timer. About 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon it runs, and then it keeps that temperature in that area much cooler.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah.
Easy, solar powered. You've got the ticket there for sure.
Yeah, and you can do the same thing if you just have like an oscillating sprinkler or something like that. You can do the same thing. I call it watering the air. You just want to water for 1 or 2 minutes by your roses, and you want to shoot it up as high into the air and let it fall down. And the whole point of that is you're really trying to get that water to evaporate before it hits the ground so your air temperature cools off.
So good to know.
Yeah, I mean, that's really cool. I grow bourbon roses. I'm actually the bourbon curator for Friends of Vintage Roses in California.
Wow, applaud you. That's awesome.
Yeah, I know, kind of, except I'm at the worst possible place for bourbon roses. No, they just need the lake a little more humidity. And I've been doing kind of that watering the air this past year, and they are just loving it. So those are kind of 2 tricks that you can use, and I should have said this at the beginning, the biggest thing that you are going to get, the happiest your roses are is in heat, is if you put about 3 to 4 inches of mulch on your roses. Mulch. Once again, soil temperature is far more important than air temperature, and that mulch really keeps that soil nice and cool. And it reduces the water needs of the roses by 50%.
Yeah. I cannot, I'm the believer in mulch, like you cannot believe, because, weed suppression, retaining moisture, and just it's pretty, and it breaks down and becomes a part of your soil. So I just can't say enough good about mulch either. And it just makes everything look tidy. And I love that, aesthetics are important. So yes, I agree. Mulch. We add mulch throughout the year, and then we end our season with more mulch for our hard winters that are going to come. So couldn't say enough about that. So I'm so glad you mentioned that, because it is so important.
Yeah, there's this beneficial fungi that occurs in forests, on forest floors, from kind of the mulch that's created. And it's called mycorrhizae, right? You've probably seen it in little bots and stuff like that. So if you mulch, that typically tends to form. But what's really cool is when you have a ton of that in your soil, they send out little tiny strings. And these little tiny strings are called mycelium. And these mycelium connect to each other, and they create something called a mycelial network. And mycelial networks, forests that have mycelial networks, are much more resistant to climate change than those that don't. And they've found that mycelial networks can not only redistribute water throughout a forest, they can also close off trees or plants that are sick. And they can also like signal fire. So with that mycelial network, it's an essential building part of your garden. And it will be so much more beneficial if you get one established in your yard. So that's the coolest thing ever, you know. In science, we didn't know this 20 years ago, and now we do. So
soil is just so important. You know, if you're gardening for any length of time, I think of when we first moved into our home and it was a new build, and so terrible soil and it's clay. And my first roses, you know, I didn't do a lot of amending to the soil, some, but they just struggled so. And a lot of it was my fault in the place that I gave them to live. So once we started bringing in triaxle loads of dirt, when I really got serious about it, you know, my success rate certainly went up for sure. And, you know, what's going on under the ground is just so important, which leads me to another question to you. And that is, what about fertilization in the process?
yeah, so fertilizing, you can do it, you cannot do it. I actually tend to be pretty light on the fertilizer, but that's because in Utah we have a microorganism called Frankia. And what it is it binds on to the roots of your rose and works as a nitrogen injector. So it takes carbon from the soil and does that. I tend to be so there's this phrase that I love, and it's called "Don't treat soil like dirt." And there's another phrase that I like, which is also "Soil is a living organism." So if people ask me about what fertilizer do I like best, the biggest thing is compost. You really want to focus on the microbiome of your soil and make sure you have beneficial bacteria in that, because that's going to kind of smooth out any of the roughness that you might experience or the deficiencies. And then when you do fertilize, you typically want to go with an organic. And you want to go a little lighter rather than heavier. One thing that's important to remember is, although our plants love fertilizer, that beneficial bacteria in the soil, basically it's kind of pooping fertilizer, right? So when that bacteria sees that its waste product is all around it, it just kind of dies. And so if you over fertilize, you can actually end up sterilizing your soil. And a lot of times we have this wonderful compost product in Utah that they make from recycled wastewater. And we'll go in to lawns, and they've been using like a synthetic fertilizer for 50 years. And the first thing we'll do is we'll put this compost down before we reseed, and it will reboot that lawn like no one's business. Yeah, and so compost and kind of thinking a little more gentler is a big thing to do. I typically suggest an organic compost. The only time I would say you want to use like a really synthetic like Osmocote is if you're doing planting roses in a pot. Then since the growing medium isn't soil, you really just need to automate that thing. So I use Osmocote in all my pots. But really I don't fertilize that much. I haven't fertilized in a couple years actually, because the beneficial bacteria, the nitrogen injectors, all of that really really thrive kind of a little when you're a little lighter on the fertilizer.
I'm so glad I asked that question because we need that reminder. You know, sometimes you get so excited about your roses are going to bloom, and if a little is good, then a lot's going to be better. You know, we just tend to think, you know, bigger and better, and let's give it all the fertilizers, throw everything we can at it. And so it's just good to be reminded that step back a little bit, you know, feed the soil, not just the plant, you know, start thinking a little differently. Our enthusiasm sometimes gets in the way. So good advice. Very good. Well, I'm going to ask you a question that for most people, it's kind of they say it's the hardest question, but I don't think this is going to be hard for you at all. What are some of your favorite roses?
Dun, dun, dun. I am opinionated about roses. And so my yard, a lot of people like to think that their yard is like a little piece of heaven. My yard is like a testing ground. So I'm always like getting rid of roses, adding new roses. There's some that I like, there's some that I don't like. Starting with my favorite. My absolute favorite, and this is just part of my personal experience, I think it's a great rose, is Frances Mayland. I think fragrance, gorgeous, gorgeous rose. And every time I just get excited when it blooms, and I absolutely love that rose. What I'm going to do to this question is I'm going to be a little creative about it. So I'm going to tell you my favorite rose in each color.
Ooh.
So, yeah, and these roses, I am mean to my roses. I'll just be honest, because I'm really testing for clients. I'm testing for what we're going to sell in our online store. I'm testing for what we're going to produce for the next year. So I'm putting, you know, it's kind of like I'm a German scientist or something, and it's like, you need to be tested. So they're gonna scream a bit. But these are the ones that I found that have minimal inputs and are just dynamite. So we'll start with the darkest of the dark. And so these tend to be a little less heat tolerant. But my favorite dark rose is Black Jade. It's miniature. And it does get super, super black, but it's a little more heat tolerant than kind of Oklahoma or Twilight Zone, which are your bigger hybrid teas. But it's just a beautiful one. I absolutely love it. Moving into kind of the russets or the browns, I'm going to go for Cinco de Mayo. Now, it goes russet kind of when it's cooler, but this is one thing that is really cool about Utah. We have 4 seasons, and rose color works off of the same chemicals as fall foliage. So throughout the season, you're going to get different colors through your roses. In summer, they will have much less of that dark purpley color, and more of your whites. So I like 4th of July, for example, because you can really see the difference in, you know, your spring and your fall in Utah. It'll be red. And I like it best in the summer when it's like 100 degrees outside and it's more pink. But the rest that I would suggest is Cinco de Mayo. Let's move into red. The red one that I use the most, and the one that's most heat tolerant I've found, is Firefighter. Excellent fragrance, hybridized by the Aurora brothers. And the coolest thing is it hardly has any thorns. So one thing that a lot of our clients don't like is thorns, because they're like, oh, I don't want my kid to fall in a thorny bush. And so those varieties without thorns, really great. But Firefighter is wonderful. Super, super enjoy it. Orange. Oh, this is hard because I actually don't like many orange roses. I don't know what it is about them, but it's like that one color. Everybody kind of has this this one color of roses that they hate. And for me, it's orange. I would say pumpkin patch. I think it's just a really happy orange. Oh, or a mini. There's a mini called Ring of Fire, and oh my Lanta, oh, it is.
Yeah, it's gorgeous. It's gorgeous. I'm not much on orange either, but Ring of Fire, whew, it is a beauty.
I mean, and the minis are so great for pots. So we're running kind of out of hybridizing space in my yard. And so we've moved more into pots, and the minis just, I mean, never has a more perfect pair meant. But Ring of Fire, I love it. I love the texture of the petals. Now moving into yellows. Yellows, people have said that yellows are supposedly the most heat tolerant, but I've actually found that like a lot of the whites are. But my favorite yellows, there are two of them, and for various reasons. My first one is Sunsprite. Sunsprite, like that is one heck of a rose. Bred by Madame Mayland in France. Excellent fragrance. It doesn't fade. Like that yellow is yellow. One of my favorites, I probably have 3 or 4 because I'm like, oh, I need another Sunsprite, and I just keep planting it. Love it. One of my favorites. It does well with a little shade. It does well in total sun. Just one heck of a rose. Second yellow one is Golden Showers. And it's a climber, and it's older, but it has that myrrh fragrance in it. And if you are wanting to get into rose breeding, hybridizing, that is the perfect mom. It is a great plant for rose breeding.
I think I grew that at one time. It was very vigorous and had a lot of thorns. Am I thinking of the right one?
I don't know. I have it in a really hot area, and so it's kind of controlled it a little bit.
Okay.
It's just spectacular. Little yellow blossoms, but the fragrance on them is that beautiful, like almost wet earth smell. That's
nice.
great. For the whites, probably Francis Mayland, but that's more of a blush with a pink, but it does get fully white in the summer. I had another white, I'm thinking, Sugar Moon. Sugar Moon's great.
Yeah, that's pretty. A lot of people really love Pope John Paul II. Do you have that one?
I've heard of that. I think I had one a couple years ago, and I probably still have it in my yard somewhere. I'm the worst example of this ever. Someone, when I first started growing roses, they're like, never take the tags off, or you tag it right when it goes in the ground. I was so bad when I first started planting roses. So it's like every June I'm out there playing Sherlock Holmes, trying to figure out what rose was. It's so bad.
Okay, I have the visual now of you as Sherlock Holmes. I'm not going to be able to get that out of my head. So next spring I'm going to be thinking of you putting on your Sherlock Holmes hat and trying to figure out what rose is what.
Yeah, and like some of them, like one of my favorite things is people every year to the Utah Rose Society Rose Show, they bring, roses they want identified. And I'm like, how do people even know these? I can't figure out the ones in my yard.
Yeah. I know, that is really true. There was a time in our Rose Society, I think when I first joined, that we had people who really could, but there's been so many added in the last, 20 years that it is getting harder to identify them. So I've got to ask, how many roses do you have? Do you know?
Oh, I don't count. I stopped counting a while ago. I just don't. I don't count.
Yeah, well, I think that's very wise. I totally agree with that theory because people will ask me how many I have, but Mr. G can tell them. He usually has it. He's got I've got garden math, so I'm, maybe 75, and he's going, no, I think you've got 120 now.
Yeah, like if I don't even know what some of these roses are in my yard, like how am I gonna know? How many I have?
Yeah. Now you've not talked about pink. Are you? You're not going to avoid
Oh,
pink, are you?
oh, pink. No, I love pink. My favorite pink, I'm gonna go with the bourbon, which is Zephyrin Druin. She's
Ooh,
the
it's so pretty.
classic bourbon. She's the most popular bourbon. Climbing Rose, thornless, um, excellent rebloom. She does like a little afternoon misting, but I mean, she's if someone wanted to start growing bourbon roses, she's the one I would push them towards.
It is a beauty. It's so pretty. I
Oh,
had her
and
many
then
years ago, but she's not. She was not. Black Spot loved her.
oh
Maybe
yeah,
it didn't have her in a good spot, but Black Spot was an issue. But she was so beautiful and so fragrant, and just a soft, pretty bloom.
yeah. None of the bourbons are good for like cut roses because their petals tend to be less thick. So, but man, do they smell? They like almost all have fragrance. They're almost all pink. But my favorite bourbon is Madame Pierre Auger, and
Ooh,
she has translucent petals,
yeah.
and so she has these the most delicate petals, and when the sun's coming through it, it's almost like this porcelain light. That is my favorite, and it's never going to win a rose show because that blossom does not travel.
But
But
it's beautiful.
it's
Oh my goodness.
just incredible. Uh, and it's one of those things. It's that beauty of roses where they're not permanent. The beauty of impermanence, how you have to really be in the moment for that rose and kind of like take it and just live for a second and smell it. And that's what makes life worth living.
It's just one of the most wonderful things about old garden roses, and I have I have several of them, and they have beautiful stories, and they have a fleeting. Many of them here only bloom one time, and so they're fleeting, but it just makes them all the more special to me, and they just give you this fireworks and fragrance in the late spring here, and they're just absolutely exquisite. And the fact that they don't last forever just makes them all the more special, I think.
Yeah, because there are a lot of roses that a lot of the florist roses, yeah, they last forever, but they look like crap. It's like it's not. I almost feel like it's not a rose.
How charming is that?
I know. It's so awful. Like there's
Okay,
nothing like. Okay, sorry. Go ahead.
tell us about a few more of your bourbons since you love them so.
Oh, my bourbons. So bourbons, like I said, are they can be a little challenging in Utah, mostly because, and this is the funniest thing ever. So I actually lived in the place in the world where the first recorded cross of a rose actually took place, and it was the bourbon rose, and it is in La Réunion, France, which is an island off the coast of Madagascar. So I lived there actually for 18 months in my youth, and it is like an entirely different climate there. It's a rainforest, pretty much, very humid, very hot. But I got into bourbons because I was like, oh, it's gonna remind me of that time. And then it was like, oh, we need to learn how to do these better. Um,
A challenge.
I know, right? But one of the things that and it's kind of like the gateway drug. It's called Variegata di Bologna. It's
Mm.
one of the first swirled roses, and so depending on the temperature it's either red and white or kind of like a peppermint color, like purple and white, and it's swirled. Came from Italy. Lovely, gorgeous. Souvenir de Malmaison is often seen as like the prototypical
Hmm.
one. It has that great kind of, when you think of an old garden rose with all its petals, and its globular shape, that's a big thing. My favorite is actually because it has a really kind of weird old blossom shape, is called boule de neige. And what boule de neige is, it actually means snowball in French. And so its blossoms, like before it fully opens, it looks like little white balls. And it's just pretty spectacular. So I love Bouldenege. And those are the ones that are coming to head. Souvenir de Sainte Anne is great. Souvenir de Sainte Anne, if you're teaching propagation, that is the rose you want to use because it propagates better than any rose I've ever seen. Like, you can give that to a newbie and they'll have like 100% take rate.
Now, before I let you go, I want to ask you to give some advice to someone who is new to growing roses. So encourage them.
I say this all the time. And it's the difference between a rosarian and a normal gardener is rosarians get excited when a rose dies because we get to buy another rose. So if you have a rose die on you, or you don't consider it a failure at all, consider it as another opportunity. Because, I mean, people who grow roses, we intentionally try to kill some of them, and then they probably thrive. Or, like, it's just because something dies, that's actually the circle of life, that's fine, but you get better at it. And so I know our Rose Society president, Elise Hutchins, she had one die, and she had this big smile on her face because she knew she was going to be able to get a new one. So I think that's the biggest difference, if you're trying to grow roses for the first time, and especially if you're buying something from like the big box stores like Lowe's and Home Depot, like those are designed, might bite it pretty bad. And that's okay. Just try again. Right rose, right place.
Absolutely. I love it. And you're so right about, that, we might mourn for a moment, but then it's like, oh, now what can I get? I actually intentionally gave away about a dozen roses this year. They were all roses that I like. I don't give away roses if they don't perform well for me. Those just get trashed. I want people to be as successful as possible. But I gave away like 12 roses so I could make room for some of these wonderful new roses that are coming out that are healthy, disease resistant, and fragrant. So I've been on a quest to add more fragrance to my garden. So yes, making room for more, it's a huge thing.
Yeah. And that's the reality to it. Yeah. I mean, I have had one rose that I gave 3 years and I hated it every single year. So I took it out and wrapped it in burlap, and then I let it dry to death in the greenhouse because I was so angry at it. I was just like, I gave you 3 years of my life.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Mark, tell our listeners how they can get in touch with you.
Yeah, so they can get in touch with me through Perfume Punk. That's the name of our co-op. And you can go to perfumepunk.com. We're pretty much on all social media. Some of it we're really bad at, but we're trying to get better at it. Or you can just email me straight at perfumepunk@gmail.com.
Perfect. I can't thank you enough for joining me today. And it's easy to see why you were chosen as the American Rose Society's rising star. Thank you so very much. Excuse me.
Oh my gosh.
Thank you so very much for coming on today.
It's just been an absolute pleasure talking to you, Teresa. And thank you so much for your kind words.
Well, keep your enthusiasm. We all need it and we appreciate it, and just keep doing what you're doing.
You too.
All the best. Well, friends, we hope you gathered some tips today on Waterwise Roses and some other things too. So since Mr. G and I are going to be adding drip irrigation to a couple of the beds for next year, this was super helpful for me. Well, until next time, stay cool and enjoy these late summer blooms, because sometimes roses save the best for last.
You've been listening to the Rose Chat podcast with Chris VanCleave and Teresa Byington, expert rose gardeners who want to help you achieve the rose garden of your dreams. Don't miss an episode. Listen anytime on our website at rosechatpodcast.com or listen on the go via the Rose Chat app on iTunes and Stitcher Radio. Share this podcast with your social networks and join us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram by using the hashtag RoseChat. Join us next time for another edition of the Rose Chat Podcast. The Rose Chat Podcast is a production of the Rose Chat Media Group, Birmingham, Alabama.